Welcome to another installment of Donning the Armor. This morning we begin in Judges chapter 15, verse 1. After a while, in the time of the wheat harvest, it happened that Samson visited his wife with a young goat. And he said, "Let me go into my wife, into her room," but her father would not permit him to go in. So, as we recall where we last left off with Samson, he was during his wedding feast. That whole time of betrothal is over. His Philistine woman that he wanted to marry. Then he played a trick on the men who were invited to his marriage feast, his party. And he put forth this riddle that they would have to solve. They then went in and convinced his wife to give them the answer. Samson gave in to his wife, gave her the answer. She gave it on to her countrymen. Samson, enraged, goes out, slays 30 men for their clothing to pay up his debt from the wager, from the bet he had made with these men. And then he said that he wanted nothing to do with his wife. He left, returned home to his father's house, and the father of the bride gave her away in marriage to his best man, who the person was standing in as his best man. Now Samson, after having time to calm down, not in a few days, but now it's the wheat harvest. It's been months, and now Samson wants back in. Now Samson has finally calmed down, finally come to his senses, and has decided that he wants to go back to his wife. Only her father's not going to permit it because now she's been remarried. Her father said, "I really thought that you thoroughly hated her. Therefore I gave her to your companion. Is not her younger sister better than she? Please take her instead." Now, this sounds bizarre, but based upon the culture of the time, that, as you know, when a wife would be widowed to her husband, the younger brother would have to take on the responsibility of now being her husband. This is the way that it is. Now that the older daughter's married, now he's offering up the younger sister, the younger daughter, so that way he would not be breaking the agreement he made with Samson and his family to provide Samson with a wife, because all of their marriages were arranged. But her father's really just saying, look, you left, you thoroughly hated her, now all of a sudden you want to return. So I don't have her to give you anymore. She's now someone else's wife. The best man who stood in for you. Now all of a sudden, this is her husband now. You can't have her back. She's no longer married to you. But I have this younger daughter. Isn't she just better than her older sister? It's not really even probably what the father thinks. Maybe, maybe not, but that's not really the importance. He's just trying to fulfill his duty and get Samson off his case and not be seen as not being the kind of honorable person that he is supposed to be in that culture. And Samson said to them, "This time I shall be blameless regarding the Philistines if I harm them." So now he's enraged. So he's saying, look, last time I might have been to blame for slaughtering those people for their clothes because I brought that on myself. But this time I'm just doing what they have brought on themselves. They have harmed me by taking my wife from me. Now I'm going to harm them by taking their lives from them, by harming them in a way. So Samson went and caught 300 foxes, and he took torches and turned the foxes tail to tail, and put a torch between each pair of the tails. And when he had set the torches on fire, he let the foxes go into the standing grain of the Philistines and burned up both the stocks and the standing grain, as well as the vineyards and olive groves. So Samson, infuriated, now goes out and catches 300 foxes. Now, for people who don't believe the Bible, this is one of those instances that they point to and say, well, this is ridiculous. Clearly, this could never happen. How could he just catch 300 foxes? It doesn't say how long it took him. I mean, he could have been doing this for months until he had enough foxes. Then he takes torches, turns them tail to tail, And people say, well, he tied their tails together. Well, yeah, but it doesn't mean he literally tied their physical tail together. It just means he tied them together with rope, with a torch in between the pair of tails. So 150 pairs, set them on fire and let them go through the standing grain. The stalks, the standing grain, everything, destroying everything in its path. This could have taken days, weeks to gather these foxes as they're bringing in. As I said, it's the time of the wheat harvest, but you don't exactly harvest in half a day. It takes time. And Samson, a man of action, setting up traps all over. People tend to forget that they're actually traps too. It's the same thing they bring up with Noah's Ark. How could Noah fit all these full-grown animals? Well, they don't have to be full-grown. They could be baby animals, small, in their youth, being brought in by the Lord. That way they'd have more reproductive years in front of them post-flood. Wouldn't take up as much space in that case. But either way, Samson burning the grain, burning out everything that they're harvesting, both the things that's still standing and the shocks, the things that they've harvested, and sending them into the vineyards and the olive groves, destroying the crops and the livelihood of these Philistines, their food, their produce, everything they have to sell and eat. Then the Philistines said, "Who has done this?" And they answered, "Samson, the son-in-law of the Timnite, because he has taken his wife and given her to his companion." So the Philistines came up and burned her and her father with fire. So the Philistines want to know who's responsible. And they say it's Samson, the son-in-law of the Timnite, of the man that we were at their feast. That's that man, that loudmouth drunkard. That father-in-law gave his wife away. He was angry and he took it out on us. And remember, the Philistines, when they couldn't figure out the riddle, threatened to burn her to death and her father's house. And that is exactly what they ended up doing in the long run anyway. She gave in to their demand, and they did not honor what they said they would do, and they turned on her and slew her anyway. Which always comes to the same conclusion when somebody is making you an ultimatum that they will harm you if you don't do what they're going to say. You cannot hold a dishonorable person to a standard of honor. This is somebody who's set on doing something evil. You can't sit back and expect them to keep their word now. You have to call their bluff in a way when you can. This is a woman who wanted no part of these immoral, violent Philistines, which she is a one of them. She wanted to appease them. She turned on her husband, and because of that, she died by the same way that she was going to if she had never turned on them. Except for in that case, she would have had Samson still there to protect her. But here she does not, because she burned her bridge with her husband and then was burned to death by the villain she was trying to keep at bay to begin with. Samson said to them, "Since you would do a thing like this, I will surely take revenge on you. And after that, I will cease." So he attacked them hip and thigh with a great slaughter. Then he went down and dwelt in the cleft of the rock of Edom. So Samson, still loving that woman, or lusting after her, so it is, goes after and goes to take revenge for what they have done. They now killed his wife. The father-in-law physically took the wife from him by giving her in marriage to someone else, but now they took her life from him. So he goes into a great slaughter, slaughtering the Philistines from this town, destroying everybody he could find with a great slaughter. And then he went and dwelt in the cleft of the rock of Edom to live almost as a hermit, trying to stay in the wilderness to keep himself protected because he knows there's a counterattack coming. Now the Philistines went up, encamped in Judah, and deployed themselves against Lehi. And the men of Judah said, "Why have you come up against us?" So they answered, "We have come up to arrest Samson, to do to him as he has done to us." So now the Philistines, coming for revenge, encamp in Judah, in Lehi. And the men of Judah are just saying, "Why are you coming up against us? Why are you coming here?" And they said, "We're here for one thing. We're not here to do you harm. We are here for Samson. He slaughtered Philistines. Now we're here to slaughter him. We need to arrest him to repay him for what he had done." So the men of Judah will now take it upon themselves and will take on the responsibility of getting Samson themselves. Then 3,000 men of Judah went down to the cleft of the rock of Edom, and said to Samson, "Do you not know that the Philistines rule over us? What is it? What is this you have done to us?" So 3,000 men of Judah, 3,000 fighting men, have now come to arrest him instead of the Philistines. They've come in place of the Philistines to do their dirty work, to arrest their countrymen as a sign of good faith among them, because as they say, "Do you not know that the Philistines rule over us? How could you have done this? The Philistines are our oppressors and have been for decades. How could you do this slaughter when you know that they have their thumb upon us?" The men of Judah knew where he was. They knew where he had run. And now they're coming out and saying, "How could you have done this? Now we have to take you in. We are 3,000 men strong. We saw what kind of slaughter you were capable of. Now we're coming against you so that we can show that we aren't rebellious in the way that you are." That's how kowtowed the Israelites are at this time of Samson. That even when you have someone fighting back, they don't want to rock the boat. That was one of the biggest fears when Jesus came on the scene from the Pharisees, is that the Pharisees had a good deal with the Romans. The Romans might have been oppressing the Israelites. They might not have liked it. But Jesus was going to rock the boat. Jesus was going to upset the balance that allowed them to enrich and empower themselves in the Roman Empire. That he was going to shift the scales. He was going to rock the boat. He was going to cause a problem, not just for their religious views, but for the power in the Roman Empire that they had. He was going to upset the Romans and cause them to oppress the nation of Israel even farther. When people are under an oppressive regime, they will do whatever they can to live in the status quo, to not upset the apple cart. It's common knowledge that when you're being oppressed, you typically have more people than the oppressor has. If you fight back, more than likely you will win. It will come at great cost, but you can win. Now, Israel knew they couldn't because the Roman Empire was far too great. The Israelites believe they can't fight back against the Philistines. But just from a mentality standpoint, people get too afraid to fight back. Generally, people just want to be left alone to live their life in as much peace as is possible. In this country all the time for the last 8 years, basically, people have been screaming civil war, civil war, civil war. And it goes back more than 8 years, to be honest with you. Probably 20 years. But screaming civil war. It's going to be pretty tough to get the United States to go into a civil war because we have a very comfortable lifestyle. You have more of a chance of us uniting against an existential enemy, an external enemy coming in to invade, than you do of a civil war. Because people don't want to be bothered. They just want to go about their lives. Even if our government is too overreaching as it is. And here you have these men of Judah in the same fashion. They have 3,000 fighting men. We're not even told how many Philistines came up, just that the Philistines went up and encamped in Judah. Judah's able to muster 3,000 men, but they don't want to rock the boat. They want to just survive in the environment that has been created for them in this time in their lives. To be as peaceful as possible. Samson, as hot-headed and unruly as he is not willing to do that. They know it, and they need to now do the Philistines' dirty work, get him arrested, hand him over to the Philistines. That way they can go back to what little comfort they live in. And it's hard to call it cowardice because it's human nature to not want to be at odds. It's hard to call anyone out for the things that they're doing because they're trying to protect their loved ones and their best interests as best they can. But at the same time, we can't become so comfortable that we're not willing to pursue a freedom. The freedom that created this country was a freedom that came from people wanting to be free to worship Jesus Christ in their own way. So they traversed the Atlantic Ocean. They made treaties and conquered land. They made homes for themselves in an unfamiliar place, full of danger and dismay and disease. Then the Founding Fathers went on to pursue more freedom from the hands of a king who was oppressive. The Israelites had Gideon free themselves to lead them into freedom. Judge after judge, Deborah and Barak. You have judge after judge coming and setting them free. But once again, they find themselves in the pit of oppression and they don't want to free themselves. Not until something drastic happens. And he said to them, as they did to me, so I have done to them. They took something I loved. I took something from them. They continuously harmed me. They harmed me by taking my wife. So I harmed their crops. They harmed my happiness. I harmed their happiness and their livelihood. They took someone's life from me. I took their lives from them. As they did to me, so I have done to them. But they said to him, we have come down to arrest you, that we may deliver you into the hand of the Philistines. Then Samson said to them, swear to me that you will not kill me yourselves. So they said, hey, we're here to arrest you and deliver you into the Philistines. Samson just wants to know, swear, make an oath with me before the Lord that you will not kill me yourselves. So they spoke to him, saying, no, but we will tie you securely and deliver you into their hand. But we will surely not kill you. And they bound them with 2 new ropes and brought them up from the rock. So he said, no, we're just going to firmly secure you and we're going to deliver you down there. We're going to arrest you, walk you back out of this place, bring you up out of this rocky area and take you and deliver you into their hands back at Judah. But we will not kill you. When he came to Lehi, the Philistines came shouting against him. Then the Spirit of the Lord came mightily upon him, and the ropes that were on his arms became like flax that is burned with fire, and his bonds broke loose from his hands. He found a fresh jawbone of a donkey, reached out his hand and shook and took it, and killed 1,000 men with it. Then Samson said with the jawbone of a donkey, heaps upon heaps with the jawbone of a donkey, I have slain 1,000 men. So the Lord comes mightily upon him, slaughtering 1,000 men with the fresh jawbone of a donkey. Now, what does fresh mean? Did he literally rip this off of a donkey's mouth and kill them? Or fresh as in it wasn't completely rotted and destroyed? I don't really know what that means. But the nastier you take your definition of fresh, the nastier it gets. But he takes a jawbone. A donkey's jawbone's pretty long. And if it was old and on the ground, you can use that kind of as a makeshift knife. You would have the teeth on there, although they have pretty flat teeth. You could do some whacking as a glove. But 1,000 men, that's how mightily the Spirit of the Lord came upon him. That's how powerful he had become. And each time we see him doing something that breaks his Nazarene vow, he's touching a dead body, making him unclean, but yet the Spirit of the Lord is still upon him in this moment. Still upon him, even though he's breaking his vow. Because although he is doing something he shouldn't be doing, the Lord is using this horribly imperfect person as his tool for judgment against the Philistines. Not everything we will see Samson do is condoned by the Lord, but he is using his passion and power and rage for his own ends. One thing unbelievers will always ask is, if God created everything and he's so great and he's so happy, why doesn't he destroy Satan? Well, he will get thrown into the abuso. He will get thrown into the lake of fire. That's why it was created, for the devil and his angels, not for human beings. Adam's fall puts us on that path. Jesus' outstretched hand pulls us from it. We choose whether or not to reach out to the hand or do it our own way into the pit of fire, into the darkness where there's great gnashing of teeth. That's our choice. God, for as great as Satan is, God is simply using him as an imperfect tool to fulfill his plan for humanity. Same as he's using Samson here. Killing 1,000 men. And then he puts together a little piece of poetry. With the jawbone of a donkey, heaps upon heaps, with the jawbone of a donkey, I've slain 1,000 men. So with this heaps of heaps, people have been trying to render this better out of the Hebrew in Aramaic than we have in English now. But it would have been more or less, with the jawbone of an ass, I have piled them in a mass, which is much funnier and much more poetic and sounds a lot more like the way I would think Samson would speak. And so it was, when he had finished speaking, that he threw the jawbone from his hand and called that place Ramath Lehi. So here he has finished destroying this man, these 1,000 people. 1,000, remember that. He had 3,000 men of Judah going to arrest him. 1,000 Philistines. If the 3,000 fight back, they're going to lose some people. But they could have overcome 1,000 Philistines. But comfort leads to following the oppressor until the burden comes too much. We have an oppressor of our own, an enemy, an accuser, a world full of sin that pushes down on us and crushes us with the pressure. We have a Savior who cloaks us from it with his righteousness, from that sinful nature, continues to sanctify us, gives us a way to stand up, remove ourselves from this situation by crying out his name and delivering us from the oppression we are under. Oppression far worse than any government, from any dictator, the oppression of sin. And we just need to cry out to the Lord as Samson is about to do. Then he became very thirsty, so he cried out to the Lord and said, "You have given this great deliverance by the hand of your servant, and now I shall die of thirst and fall into the hand of the uncircumcised." So he's saying, you just brought all this great power. You had this massive slaughter, but now I'm going to die of thirst. Now I'm going to fall into the hands of these uncircumcised believers because I'm just going to die of thirst, which gives off a lot of feelings of Esau. What good is my birthright if I'm just going to die of hunger anyway? Samson, all this great victory in battle, and he thinks the Lord who saw him through that will not see him through thirst. So God split the hollow place that is in Lehi, and water came out, and he drank. And his spirit returned, and he revived. Therefore he called its name En-Hakkore, which is in Lehi to this day. And he judged Israel 20 years in the days of the Philistines. So he will be a judge 20 years. Now, between 15 and 16, we're not exactly sure how long he stays up in that rocky mountain, at the rocky area of Edom. If he continues to move around, we don't know exactly how much time takes place between that battle with the jawbone and the beginning of his downfall in chapter 16. We do know time has passed. He will end up being the judge for 20 years. Not in the judge the way Gideon was or Deborah was, where they were respected leaders, but as almost a one-man army against the Philistines. That's essentially Samson's role at this point. He is he's not someone judging as in they come to him for advice, but that he is constantly going out and facing these Philistines in battle. That he is becoming a thorn in their side as they oppress Israel, because Israel will not join him and fight back. Probably hasn't even asked them to. He's not like Jephthah, who is now a head of an army. He's a solo man doing solo missions against the Philistine army. But moving on to chapter 16. Now Samson went to Gaza and saw a harlot there, and he went into her. When the Gazites were told, "Samson has come here," they surrounded the place and lay in wait for him all night at the gate of the city. They were quiet all night, saying, "In the morning, when it is daylight, we will kill him." And Samson lay low till midnight. Then he arose at midnight, took hold of the doors of the gate of the city, and the 2 gateposts, pulled them up, bar and all, put them on his shoulders, and carried them to the top of the hill that faces Hebron. So following his lust yet again, Samson goes in, puts himself in danger yet again for his lust. Following his lust. As imperfect a tool as possible for a man who is imperfect as possible. Said in the last time, saved soul, wasted life. Samson is in the hall of faith in the book of Hebrews. But when you read about him following and pursuing his lust at every moment, it is quite clearly that the only reason Samson has any form of salvation is simply by the grace of God. Because his lust continues to lead him farther and farther down his path, farther and farther away from the Lord. But the Lord continues to use his rebellion to bring forth victory for the Israelites. But here they are, they're laying low, but they're laying in wait. And Samson, knowing this, is found out. And now he's not waiting for the morning. He just rips the gates down, a show of absolute strength. pulling out these massive gate doors, carrying them, and then just leaving them at the top of a hill, leaving them as a sign that you will not trap me. I will do as I want. And it's both an intimidating sight, and for us, and the example he sets in the Old Testament, a very sad sight of what could have been if he truly followed the Lord. Afterward, it happened that he loved a woman in the valley of Sorek, whose name was Delilah. And the lords of the Philistines came up to her and said to her, entice him, and find out where his great strength lies, and by what means we may overpower him, that we may bind him to afflict him, and every one of us will give you 1,100 pieces of silver. So 5,500 pieces of silver. Just about 5 lords, I believe there were. That's a lot of money for Delilah. Life-changing amount of money. And Samson is not someone who sneaks around. We saw that with Gideon. He snuck around to destroy the altar. He snuck around to fight the battle in the middle of the night. Not so with Samson. Samson's the guy who just charges in the front door and goes to battle. Everyone knows where he is. They just can't figure out how to fight him. Entice him and find out where his great strength lies. Which also goes to show Samson, as much as he's shown as this giant Adonis, muscles, bodybuilder size, more than likely he wasn't very much bigger than a normal person. Or else they wouldn't wonder where his strength lies. If Goliath was going around destroying things in the way Samson is, nobody'd wonder where his strength lied. They'd be, well, he's a giant. He's going to do giant person things. So something about Samson looked ordinary, but no one could figure out why. And it's because no one believed in the God of Israel anymore. They didn't understand that it was simply the Lord using him as a tool. So now they want to know how to overpower him. Where does his strength lie? How do we destroy this man? So Delilah said to Samson, please tell me where your great strength lies, and with what you may be bound to afflict you. Now, I don't know why anybody would not see a giant red flag pop out of this woman's head. Now, I'm pretty sure as this being recorded, like, please tell me where your great strength lies so that you can be murdered, is not really how she's saying it. They're probably in bed, relaxing after being intimate. And she's whispering it sweetly, just asking him about the secrets of his life. What were your parents like? What was it like as a child with this great strength, which, as far as we know, he didn't have as a child? Where does this strength come from? Have you ever been bound up? Has anyone been able to bind you up and keep you down? How did you get out of it? What did you do? And Samson said to her, if they bind me with 7 fresh bowstrings, not yet dried, then I shall become weak and be like any other man. So if you have these 7 fresh strings, not yet dried, still pliable, oh, that's when I'll be weak. That's my weakness. It's magic. Like Achilles will be written about later. Achilles, his heel, he was dipped in. This half-god was dipped in front of the gods, but because they had to hold him by his heel, that one part of him didn't get that impervious coating upon him. So that's his one weakness. Because a lot of people make allusions between Samson, Achilles, and Hercules. But Samson is completely different from them. Because it's not a weakness. He has no weaknesses. Because his weaknesses have already been exposed. He's already eaten and drank what he was not supposed to eat and drink. He's already touched the unclean things he was not meant to touch. The only thing he has not done yet is cut his hair. But his power doesn't come from his hair. His power comes from the Spirit of the Lord being upon him, simply from God. So the lords of the Philistines brought up her 7 fresh bowstrings, not yet dried, and she bound him with them. Now men were lying in wait, staying with her in the room. And she said to him, "The Philistines are upon you, Samson." But he broke the bowstrings as a strand of yarn breaks when it touches fire. So the secret of his strength was not known. So she had men lying in wait. But they most likely wanted her to test this out before they tested their lives out and ran upon him. And this first test goes by. He told her, and she acted and tried to tie him up. But he still doesn't see the issue. Then Delilah said to Samson, "Look, you have mocked me and told me lies," much like his wife said, that he was mocking her by not telling her the answer to the riddle. "Now please tell me what you may be bound with." So he said to her, if they bind me securely with new ropes that have never been used, then I shall become weak and be like any other man. Of course, we've seen him tied with new ropes by the Judean army, so we know that's not true. But after the first time, he still goes along with this, and he still tells her again. And gives her another idea what to do. And again, she will act on this. Therefore, Delilah took new ropes and bound them with them, and said to him, "The Philistines are upon you, Samson." And men were lying in wait, staying in the room. But he broke them off his arms like a thread. Delilah said to Samson, "Until now, you have mocked me and told me lies. Tell me what you may be bound with." So again, a second time, she is turned on him. A second time, and he continues with this. He's still, because of his lusts and his arrogance and his pride, he continues to play this game. Play a very dangerous game by putting his strength to the test, putting the Lord's grace to the test. He continues to step out and test the bounds of how far the Lord will let him go before he finally goes one step too far. Then he said to her, "If you weave the 7 locks of my head into the web of the loom." So now he's touching his hair. Now he's getting dangerously close to breaking every single piece of the Nazarene vow. So she wove it tightly with the batten of the loom and said to him, "The Philistines are upon you, Samson." But he awoke from his sleep and pulled out the batten and the web from the loom. Then she said to him, "How can you say I love you when your heart is not with me? You have mocked me these 3 times and have not told me where your great strength lies." So 3 times she has sent up this massive red flag. And 3 times he has continued to tempt fate with her. Playing along with this joke. Arrogant, prideful, not understanding the position he is in and how dangerously close he has come to letting his pride cause him to fall. And it came to pass when she pestered him daily with her words and pressed him, so that his soul was vexed to death. She had pestered him so much, he just wanted her to be done, to stop, to be finished with this. That he told her all his heart and said to her, "No razor has ever come upon my head, for I have been a Nazarite to God from my mother's womb. If I am shaven, then my strength will leave me, and I shall become weak and be like any other man. No razor has ever come upon me. I am a Nazarite to my God. From the time I was born, I've never had my hair shaved down. Yet if I am, my strength will leave me. I will be like any other man." After time and time again, this woman trying each thing, his pride leads him to his fall. When Delilah saw that he told her all his heart, she sent and called for the lords of the Philistines, saying, "Come up once more, for he has told me all his heart." So the lords of the Philistines came up to her and brought the money in their hand. Then she lulled him to sleep on her knees, and called for a man and had him shave off the 7 locks of his head, shave off the completeness of his head. Then she began to torment him, and his strength left him. So as his head's being shaved, she begins to mock and torment and curse him while he sleeps in her lap. Following his lust, following his desires, following his false sense of pride in his own strength. This woman he believes he loves because he lusts after her begins to torment and mock him. And she said, "The Philistines are upon you, Samson." So he awoke from his sleep and said, "I will go out as before at other times and shake myself free." But he did not know that the Lord had departed from him, that he had finally taken one step too far and let his pride cause him to fall. Then the Philistines took him and put out his eyes and brought him down to Gaza. They bound him with bronze fetters and he became a grinder in the prison. So they took him, bound him, put out his eyes, literally were to gouge his eyeballs out of his head, then tie him to a grinding wheel where he would just walk in circles, grinding grain. Taking him to Gaza, the same place where he had ripped down the doors, where he'd shown his massive strength. And now he is a weak slave, no longer walking free and prideful, walking up that hill with their doors, but now oppressed, destroyed, and blinded because of the pride he had in his own strength. However, the hair of his head began to grow again after it had been shaved. And once again, the hair doesn't do anything. The hair is just hair. But now, when the hair was shaved, they could retake the Nazirite vow. Now his hair's starting to grow back. And if he wishes to retake the Nazirite vow, he can. He had broken every aspect of it. But there is a place in God's plan for each and everything that Samson causes himself. Now the lords of the Philistines gathered together to offer a great sacrifice to Dagon, their god, and to rejoice. They said, "Our God has delivered into our hands Samson, our enemy." When the people saw him, they praised their God, for they said, "Our God has delivered him into our hands, our enemy, the destroyer of our land, and the one who multiplied our dead. He destroyed their grain." Dagon, thought to be at times thought to be a fish god, was apparently the god of their harvest. So that's why they're making a great sacrifice to Dagon, because he had destroyed their harvest. Then he had slaughtered people after people after people, multiplied their dead. And now they come together to rejoice. So it happened, when their hearts were merry, that they said, "Call for Samson, that he may perform for us. Let our blind monkey perform." So they called for Samson from the prison, and he performed for them. And they stationed him between the pillars. Makes you wonder what they performed. Did they make him dance? Did they just punch him and slap him like they did to Christ? Did they torture him as a performance? But they put him between these two pillars. Then Samson said to the lad who held him by the hand, who pulled him to the pillars, said, "Let me feel the pillars which support the temple, so that I can lean on them." Now the temple was full of men and women. All the lords of the Philistines were there, about 3,000 men, and the women on the roof watching while Samson performed this mighty temple in Gaza of the Philistines, watching him be struck, watching him do whatever they were having and calling a performance. Then Samson called to the Lord, saying, O Lord God, remember me, I pray. Strengthen me, I pray, just this once, O God, that I may with one blow take vengeance on the Philistines for my 2 eyes. Not for the Israelites, not for the Lord, not because they're some wicked pagans, but because they took my eyes. They took my eyes. Remember me, I've been an imperfect servant, I've been terrible, but allow me to take vengeance for my eyes. Samson to the very end thinking only of him and what he has been, what he has gone through, and what they have done to him. And Samson took hold of the 2 middle pillars which supported the temple, and he braced himself against them, one on his right and the other on his left. Then Samson said, let me die with the Philistines, and he pushed with all his might, and the temple fell on the lords and all the people who were in it. So the dead that he killed in his death were more than he had killed in his life. And his brothers and all his father's household came down and took him, and brought him up, and buried him between Zorah and Eshtaol. In the tomb of his father Manoah, he had judged Israel 20 years. Saved soul, wasted life. Samson, an absolute failure to live for God and put God first, constantly putting himself first. Nothing but pride leading to his fall. But as we're told in Proverbs, pride leads to a fall, and a haughty look to destruction. His pride led to his fall. But the haughtiness and overconfidence and arrogance of the Philistines and their strength and their false god led to their destruction. Every rebellion of Samson leads to the ultimate plan of the Lord to bring forth judgment on these Philistines. His hair starts to grow back, and he has this chance to reconsecrate himself to the Lord, to become a Nazirite once again, to remember me. I pray, strengthen me. I'm going to go out in a blaze of glory, basically committing suicide. This is a murder-suicide. He brings everything down upon himself. But the Lord allows him that grace to take this action for God's ultimate goal. God didn't choose an upright person for this. He chose a broken person who would rebel and fall to their lusts and sin again and again and again, because the Lord knows our end from our beginning. He knew Samson's choices would continue to put him into a place where the lords over the Philistines would be gathered together, and they could all be judged in one fell swoop. In one more prideful act of arrogance on Samson's part. In one more act of haughty, dictatorial showmanship by the lords of the Philistines in that temple. By making sport of their enemy. If they had just killed him outright, they wouldn't have been in this situation. But their pride and their haughtiness led to their destruction. Same as Samson's. Also, the Lord could have his vengeance on the wickedness of the Philistines. God's plan does not always take us the way that we think it will, the way we wish it will, but it takes us to his ultimate goal. And his ultimate goal was to have the Philistines judged, and he needed a tool, even one as imperfect as Samson, to fulfill his goal. So when you look at what the Lord has for your life, you go, I am too imperfect. You are not as imperfect as Samson. And the Lord still fulfilled his plan with him. And he ended up in the Hall of Faith. So whatever the Lord has planned for your life, take hold of Christ. Walk out whatever path he has. Because the Lord could use you too. When we look at unbelievers having success, living for lust the way Samson did, they might not have salvation, but the Lord could certainly use him and use those people in whatever way he sees fit for his purposes. We have choices to make. When we put our faith in Christ, we should not be walking as a Samson. But it's a good negative lesson in that no matter how far we have fallen, the Lord still looks out for us. The Lord is still with us. Samson, with his eyes gouged out, being a grinder, now being mocked and tormented in the belly of the enemy. He's not at the temple. He's not at the tabernacle. He's not offering sacrifices. He's just crying out in the name of the Lord. And the Lord hears him. And the Lord's with him. And the Lord works through him. That is the faithfulness and love the Lord has for us. That is so incredibly awe-inspiring in an account that is less than awe-inspiring by a man who is less than awe-inspiring. That is the perfect love, justice, and sovereignty of the Lord. All right, that's where we will end it for this morning. I hope this was fruitful for you. I hope to see you back again next time. But until then, be blessed.